After my mom died, my family gave the house to my brother because he has a family, but it didn't end there. My name is Olivia Carter. In the last 7 years of my mother's life, my world had narrowed to the four walls of our family home, the sterile whiteness of hospital rooms, and the beeping of the many machines that bound her to this world. I was 41 years old, but I felt like an old man. I was responsible, quiet, the one who stayed. While my younger brother Daniel was building his life, marrying an ambitious wife, Jessica, having 2 wonderful children, and climbing the career ladder, I was destroying mine. I turned down a promotion that would have brought me to Chicago. I broke off a relationship with a good man who couldn't understand why my mother's panic attacks at 2 a.m. were more important than our future. My life turned into a series of prescriptions, doctor visits, and long, lonely nights spent listening to the shallow breathing of the woman who gave me life, while her own was slowly and cruelly taken away from her by a relentless disease. Daniel and Jessica, of course, visited me. On Sunday afternoons, they would come for an hour, bring a pie they had bought at the store, and look ostentatiously preoccupied. Daniel would slap me on the shoulder and say, "You're a saint, Liv, seriously." Jessica looked around the living room, her gaze lingering on a dusty shelf or a stack of medical supplies. "It must be so hard to keep up with everything," she said, and there was less sympathy in her tone than appreciation. They were guests. I was the staff. I remember one special Tuesday, a day that was etched in my memory with the acid of fatigue. Mom didn't sleep all night, confused and worried. I didn't sleep more than an hour. Around noon, Jessica called. Her voice was clear, crisp, and harsh against the background of static in my head. "Hi, Liv. I just wanted to check in. How is she doing?" "It was a rough night," I said in a flat voice. I stared at the bowl of oatmeal on the kitchen table that I had tried to feed my mom 3 hours ago. The oatmeal is already cold and curled up. "Oh, poor thing," Jessica said with a note of confusion in her voice. "Listen, a quick question. Dan and I are thinking about the future, having kids. We were looking at online property taxes in the area where Mom lives. Do you happen to know if she receives a fixed income benefit? It would make a big difference in the future." I stood there, holding the phone to my ear, and the cold oatmeal was the perfect symbol of my life. My mother was in the next room, fighting for every breath, and her daughter-in-law was calculating the future costs of maintaining her house. "I have to go, Jessica," I said, and hung up. This was the first crack in the dam. For the first time, I realized that they didn't perceive this house as a house filled with memories or as Mom's last refuge. They saw him as valuable, heritage, their legacy. My Aunt Ruth, my mother's sister, was no better. She called and praised Daniel for 20 minutes. "He's doing well, isn't he? How he copes with his career and family? It's so hard. It's good that you're here to help, Margaret. You've always managed on your own." My self-sacrifice was perceived not as a gift, but as my function. My ability to cope with difficulties was treated not as a power that I had developed, but as a natural resource that they could freely use. I was the backbone of the family, and they never once thought about the fact that this pillar could crack. On the day my mother passed away, silence reigned in the house. The beeping machines were gone, the humming of the oxygen concentrator stopped. All that's left is a deep, deafening void. Daniel and Jessica arrived an hour later. Jessica hugged me in a tight, awkward hug. "You were so good to her, Olivia," she whispered, but her eyes were already scanning the living room, taking inventory. Daniel was more direct. Later that evening, when I was stupidly sorting through a stack of Mom's shawls, he was sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "We'll have to call Mr. Harrison tomorrow," he said, referring to the family lawyer, "to sort out the property." I just nodded. I couldn't find the words. The shawls still smelled of her. "I know this is hard," he continued, leaning forward, "but Mom and I talked about it. She wanted the house to stay in the family, for the grandkids, a place for them to grow up." I looked at him then, really looked at him. In his mind, I wasn't family in the same way he was. He had a wife and kids. He was a complete unit. I was a single, childless woman. a loose end. The will reading was scheduled for the following Monday. The 5 days leading up to it were a blur of sympathetic casseroles from neighbors and phone calls from relatives who hadn't spoken to my mother in years. Daniel and Jessica were models of efficiency, arranging the funeral, accepting condolences, and treating me with a delicate, suffocating kindness that felt like being smothered with a silk pillow. They were managing my grief for me because they had decided I was too emotional to handle things myself. The lawyer's office was exactly as I'd imagined: dark wood, leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been opened, and the faint smell of old paper and new money. Mr. Harrison was a portly man with a kind face that didn't quite reach his eyes. Aunt Ruth was there, sitting beside Daniel and Jessica, forming a solid, united front. I sat alone on the other side of the mahogany table. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began reading the will. It was standard enough at first: a few small bequests to distant cousins, her jewelry to be divided between me and Jessica, her collection of antique dolls to her grandchildren. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wasn't a greedy person. I had never thought about the money. But the house was different. It was the last piece of my mother. It was the vessel that held the last 7 years of my life. It was where I slept, ate, and cried. It was mine, not by ownership, by occupancy, by sacrifice, by love. Then Mr. Harrison docked the final, most significant asset. Regarding the property located at 456 Cherry Lane, he read, his voice neutral, I, Margaret Carter, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath my home, in its entirety, to my son, Daniel Carter. The air left my lungs. It was a physical blow, as if someone had punched me in the stomach. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Daniel looked down at his hands, a practiced look of humble acceptance on his face. Jessica reached over and squeezed his arm, a triumphant glint in her eye. Aunt Ruth nodded slowly, a sad but satisfied smile on her lips. Mr. Harrison wasn't finished. He took a breath and read the next line, the line that would be seared into my memory forever. I make this decision with a heavy heart, but my son has a family to provide for, and it is my deepest wish that my grandchildren grow up in the home their father was raised in. It is a legacy for the Carter name. A legacy. I wasn't part of the legacy. I was the caretaker of the legacy, and my services were no longer required. There was a final sentence, an afterthought, a pathetic consolation prize. To my beloved daughter Olivia, who has been my rock and my comfort, I leave the remainder of my savings account with all my love. I later found out the remainder was just over $7,000. I had spent 5 times that amount of my own money on my mother's care over the years. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could see was Jessica's smug, pitying face. Aunt Ruth was the first to speak. "It's what's right, Olivia," she said softly, as if lecturing a child. "A family needs a home. You understand that." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the polished surface of the table, my reflection a pale, blurry ghost. Then Daniel, my brother, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the man whose rare visits had been the highlight of my mother's lonely weeks, looked at me from across the table. He gave me a small, tight smile. "Liv," he said, his voice gentle, but the words as sharp as glass. "Obviously, we don't want to rush you. Take your time. But you should probably start looking for your own place soon." That was it, the final twist of the knife. Not even 24 hours in my mother's grave, and my own brother was politely, gently telling me I was about to be homeless. He had his legacy. I had a deadline. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. All eyes were on me. They were expecting tears. They were expecting a scene. They were expecting the emotional Olivia that Jessica had so carefully painted for them. I gave them nothing. I looked at Daniel, at Jessica, at my aunt. I held their gazes one by one, my own expression a complete and utter blank. I didn't trust myself to speak. The rage and betrayal were a physical thing, a hot metallic taste in the back of my throat. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the office, leaving them sitting there with their victory and their stolen house. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, a single cold thought crystallized in the chaos of my mind. This is not over. The drive home, to the house that was no longer my home, was a blur. I walked through the front door, and the silence I'd felt before was different now. It was no longer just empty. It was hostile. Every object, every photograph, every worn spot on the carpet seemed to mock me. This was the museum of my sacrifice, and I was about to be kicked out. I sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, the same step where I'd sat with Mom and looked through old photo albums, the same step where I'd collapsed in tears after a particularly harrowing hospital visit. I had poured my life into this house, into her. And for what? To be told my life, my sacrifice, was worth less than Daniel's theoretical need for a bigger backyard for his kids? The next few days were a living nightmare. Daniel and Jessica, in an act of what they probably considered generosity, gave me a grace period. "Take a month, Liv," Daniel had said over the phone. "Get your things in order. We won't even start talking to contractors until you're settled somewhere else." Contractors. They were already planning to rip apart my mother's house, to tear down the walls that held the echoes of her laughter. Jessica, true to form, began her campaign of subtle psychological warfare. She would drop by unannounced, always with a reason. Just grabbing Mom's old recipe box, or the kids wanted to see their grandma's garden one more time. Each visit was a tiny invasion. She'd walk through the rooms, her eyes scanning everything. One afternoon, I found her in my bedroom, holding a paint swatch against the wall. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh, Liv, I'm so sorry. This room has such great light. I was thinking it would be a perfect nursery." She smiled, a bright, false smile. "We're expecting another, a surprise." Another nail in my coffin. Another reason why their need was greater than mine. A new baby, the ultimate trump card. "This is still my room, Jessica," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Her smile faltered for a second. "Of course, I'm sorry. It's just, we're so excited to make this our family home, to fill it with noise and life again. Mom would have loved that." Every sentence was a perfectly crafted weapon, designed to make me feel selfish and small for even wanting to stay. She was painting me as the bitter spinster standing in the way of a happy family's dream, a ghost haunting the halls of progress. Aunt Ruth called me a few days later. Her tone was stern, disciplinary. "Olivia, I heard from Jessica that you were a bit cold with her," she began, no preamble. "You need to understand, this is hard for them too. They don't want to feel like they're pushing you out." "They are pushing me out," I said, disbelief making my voice shake. "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "Your mother made a practical decision. Daniel has a family. He has responsibilities. You're adaptable. You always have been. You can start fresh somewhere. It might be the best thing for you. A clean break." A clean break. As if the last 7 years of my life could be wiped away like a smudge on a window. As if my love and my labor had no value, no weight. I was being erased from my own story. The financial reality began to set in. The $7,000 from my mother's account wouldn't even cover the first and last month's rent and a security deposit on a decent apartment in this market. My own savings were a ghost of what they once were. I pulled up my bank statements, my hands trembling. Line after line of debits, co-pays for prescriptions, bills for specialized medical equipment insurance wouldn't cover, even groceries I'd bought for the house that Daniel had never once offered to chip in for. I had a spreadsheet, a meticulous record of every penny I had spent on her care that came out of my own pocket. I'd never intended to ask for it back. It was done out of love. But now, looking at the total, a staggering sum, close to $40,000, I felt a surge of cold fury. I called Daniel. "Hey, Dan," I started, trying to keep my voice even. "I was going through some finances. I have a list of Mom's expenses that I covered over the last few years. It's a pretty significant amount. I think it's only fair that it gets reimbursed from the estate before everything is settled." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Liv, come on," he finally said, his voice laced with annoyance. "Don't do this." "Do what? Ask for the money I'm owed?" "Owed? That was your choice," he said, and the casual cruelty of it stole my breath. "You chose to pay for that stuff. Jessica and I helped in our own way. We provided emotional support. We were there for her." "You were there for Sunday lunch, Daniel," I finally snapped, the control I'd been holding on to shattering. "I was there when she was screaming in pain at 3 a.m. I was there when she choked on her food. I was there when she cried because she couldn't remember my name. Don't you dare talk to me about emotional support." "See? This is what Jessica was talking about," he shot back, his voice turning cold. "You're being overly emotional. You're trying to turn this into some kind of transaction. Mom wouldn't have wanted this. She wouldn't want us fighting over money." He was using my mother against me, using my love for her as a weapon to deny me what was rightfully mine. "I'll send you the spreadsheet," I said, my voice now devoid of all emotion. "Have your lawyer look at it." "Do whatever you need to do, Liv," he said dismissively. "But the will is the will. The house is mine. The rest is just noise." He hung up. I stood in the silent kitchen, the phone still in my hand, and I felt a despair so profound it was almost peaceful. They had taken everything, my past, my present, and now my future. They had left me with nothing but ghosts and a $7,000 check. I started to pack. It was a torturous process. Every object I touched held a memory. A chipped teacup my mother loved, a faded photograph of my father who had passed away a decade ago, a book of poetry with her spidery handwriting in the margins. I felt like an archaeologist excavating my own life, packing it into cardboard boxes. I was adrift, and the tide was pulling me out into a cold, dark ocean. A few days into this grim task, our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, knocked on the door. She was in her 80s, a kind, sharp-as-a-tack woman who had been my mother's closest friend for 40 years. She held a Tupperware container of her famous lemon bars. "Thought you could use something sweet, dear," she said, her eyes watery with age, full of genuine sympathy. She looked past me at the boxes stacked in the hallway. "I heard the news from that chatterbox Jessica. I'm so sorry, Olivia. It's just not right." Tears pricked my eyes for the first time in days. It was the first unfiltered kindness I'd received. "It is what it is, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice thick. She stepped inside, placing the container on the hall table. She looked around the house, a wistful expression on her face. So many memories in these walls. She paused, then looked at me intently. "Your mother was so worried, you know." Towards the end, "I know," I said. "She was scared." "No, not just scared of the illness," Mrs. Gable said, lowering her voice. "She was worried about this, about what would happen. She talked to me a lot. She felt pressured." My head snapped up. "Pressured? By who?" "Oh, you know," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "The family. Your Aunt Ruth was always in her ear about Daniel and his legacy. And that wife of his, sweet as pie to your face, but all business behind it." She leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper. Your mother said something to me just a few weeks before she passed. It was one of her more lucid days. She grabbed my hand and her eyes were so clear. She said, "Eleanor, if things go wrong, tell Livy to find the cedar chest. Tell her to look under the quilts. I hope she finds the box." I stared at her, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. The box? What box? She didn't say, Mrs. Gable admitted. She just repeated it. Tell her to find the box. She was very insistent. I got the feeling it was important. A flicker of something, not yet hope, but a fragile spark in the darkness, ignited within me. The cedar chest. It sat at the foot of my mother's bed. It had been my grandmother's. It was filled with old linens, baby clothes, and the heavy scent of mothballs and thyme. I hadn't even thought to look in it. After Mrs. Gable left, I stood in the hallway for a long time. The house was still silent, but now it felt different. It felt like it was holding a secret. I walked slowly up the stairs and into my mother's bedroom. The cedar chest was there, a dark, heavy rectangle of wood against the pale floral wallpaper. My hands trembled as I knelt and lifted the heavy lid. The familiar scent of cedar and lavender washed over me. On top were the neatly folded quilts my grandmother had made. Beneath them, my own baby blanket and a tiny pair of bronze shoes. I dug deeper, my fingers pushing through layers of carefully preserved history. And then I felt it. It wasn't soft like the linens. It was hard and rectangular. My heart leaped into my throat. I pulled away the final layer of blankets, and there it was. It was a small, plain wooden box, no bigger than a book. It wasn't locked. With a deep, shaky breath, I lifted the lid.
The attic air was thick with the ghosts of forgotten things, a congregation of dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from my phone. The wooden box sat on my lap, feeling heavier than its small size suggested. It was plain, dark cherry wood, its surface smooth under my trembling fingers. There was no ornate carving, no lock, just a simple, unassuming container that felt like the final word in a long, painful conversation. For a moment, I just held it, breathing in the scent of cedar and thyme. This was it, the period at the end of the sentence of my life, or the start of a new one. My fingers found the small brass latch on the front. It was cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the hot, metallic taste of rage that had been my constant companion for days. With a dry click that seemed to echo in the profound silence of the house, the lid opened. The first thing I saw was a stack of letters tied with a simple, faded blue ribbon. Beneath them, nestled in a bed of what looked like yellowed cotton, was a thick, folded vellum document, sealed with a blob of dark red wax. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet despair. I reached for the letters first, my hands clumsy. The ribbon crumbled under my touch, disintegrating into a fine blue powder. The top envelope was addressed to me, Olivia, in my mother's familiar spidery script. My breath hitched. I unfolded the paper, the crinkle of it loud as a gunshot in the still air. "My dearest Olivia," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I have failed you in life, and this is my only chance to make it right in death. I am so sorry. Those are small, useless words for the mountain of debt I owe you, but they are the truest words I possess. You must be feeling a betrayal so deep it has hollowed you out. I know this because I saw it coming. I saw the way Jessica looked at this house, not as a home, but as an asset. I heard the way Daniel spoke of his legacy as if it were something to be claimed, not earned. They are good people in their own way, I suppose, but their love is conditional, transactional. Yours was not. Yours was the bedrock of my final years. They started talking to me about the will months ago, gently at first. Jessica, with her suffocating kindness, would talk about needing a yard for the kids. Daniel would mention the importance of keeping the house in the family, by which he meant his family. It was a slow, steady pressure, a wearing down of my will when I was already so weak. They made me feel that my illness was a burden on their future,
and that the only way to repay them for their performative concern was to sign my home, your home, over to them. And so I did. I signed the will they had their lawyer draw up. I let them believe they had won. It was easier than fighting, Olivia. I was so tired of fighting. I hope you can forgive me for that cowardice, but it was not my final act. 2 years ago, long before the whispers about the will began, I did something else. I went to see Mr. Abernathy, my old lawyer, the one I had before Daniel insisted on his own, more modern associate. I was of sound mind and body, and I made a decision, a clear, final, and legally binding one. The document at the bottom of this box is a quitclaim deed. It was signed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk's office on March 12th, 2 years ago. On that day, 456 Cherry Lane ceased to be my property. It became yours. Tears were blurring the words. I wiped them away impatiently, my entire body humming with a strange electric current. I dropped the letter and fumbled for the thick vellum document. My fingers, slick with sweat, struggled to break the wax seal. It cracked open, revealing dense formal type. Quitclaim deed. The legal jargon was a thicket of impenetrable phrases, but I saw the important parts, clear as day. The grantor, Margaret Ann Carter. The grantee, Olivia Marie Carter. The property, Lot 7, Block 3 of the Cherry Lane Edition, also known as 456 Cherry Lane. The date of filing, March 12, 2 years ago. It was real. The house was already mine. It had been mine for 2 years. The will they had read, the one that had been the nail in my coffin, was a piece of meaningless theater. You cannot bequeath what you do not own. My mother, in her exhaustion and fear, had not been a victim. She had been a strategist. She had built a legal trapdoor and handed me the key, trusting I would be smart enough to find it. The will wasn't a betrayal. It was a diversion, a piece of bait thrown to the wolves to keep them from the real prize while she secured it for me. I fell back against a stack of old magazines, the deed clutched in my hand like a holy relic. The suffocating weight that had been pressing on my chest for a week, for 7 years, began to lift. It was replaced by something else, something wild and unfamiliar. It wasn't just relief, it was a cold, clarifying fury, a righteous anger that burned away the fog of grief and exhaustion. They had mourned a matriarch, but they had celebrated a real estate transaction. They had patted my hand and called me a saint, while they were, in effect, changing the locks on my own front door. The patronizing calls, Jessica's saccharine texts about sending me listings for one-bedroom apartments, Aunt Ruth's lecture on the importance of a complete family unit. It all replayed in my mind, but the sound was different now. It was no longer the drone of my defeat, but the evidence for my prosecution. I was no longer a ghost haunting the halls of my own history. I was the owner. I was the landlord. I sat there for what felt like an hour in the dusty silence of the attic, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. The house around me seemed to change. The creak of the floorboards was no longer a sad sigh, but a familiar greeting. The scent of old wood and my mother's rosewater perfume was no longer a painful memory, but the smell of home. My home. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a jarring intrusion. I pulled it out. It was a text from Daniel. "Hey Liv, Jess and I are coming by tomorrow around noon with the architect. Just want to get some preliminary measurements for the kitchen reno. Hope that's okay. We can start helping you pack up some of the more sentimental stuff then." The casual arrogance of it stole my breath. Hope that's okay. As if my permission was a quaint formality. As if I were a tenant whose lease had expired, to be managed and placated. He was planning a renovation of my kitchen, in my house. I looked from the glowing screen of the phone to the deed in my hand. The old Olivia, the one who had existed just an hour ago, would have typed back, "Okay," and then cried into a cardboard box. The old Olivia was the family's bedrock, meant to be solid and silent and bear any weight piled upon her. But bedrock can shift, it can crack, and sometimes it can cause an earthquake. I didn't text Daniel back. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over a name I hadn't needed in years, my thumb pressed down. The phone began to ring, the sound crisp and clean in the quiet attic. It was a sound of purpose. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Abernathy and Sons, how can I help you?" A smile touched my lips, the first genuine one in what felt like a lifetime. It felt sharp. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and clear, all the exhaustion burned out of it. "I need to speak with Mr. Abernathy. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm the owner of 456 Cherry Lane, and I'd like to schedule a consultation." I paused, taking a deep, clean breath. It's regarding an eviction. The click of the receiver settling back into its cradle was the loudest sound the house had heard in days. It wasn't a sound of conclusion, but of a starting pistol. The rage that had been a hot, metallic taste in my mouth for a week had not vanished. It had simply cooled, hardening into something with weight and purpose. For the first time since Mom's last breath had misted the air, the profound silence of 456 Cherry Lane no longer felt hostile. It felt like a held breath, an ally waiting for my command. My hand was still on the phone when I saw it, the faint, greasy fingerprint Daniel had left on the wall by the thermostat yesterday, a casual mark of ownership. Before, it was a symbol of my erasure. Now, it was evidence of a trespasser. I walked over and wiped it clean with the sleeve of my sweater. My house. The lawyer, a man named Arthur Davies, agreed to meet me the next morning. He didn't work out of a sterile high-rise, but a converted Victorian downtown, a place that smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and the quiet confidence of generational wealth. He was all sharp angles and sharper intellect, his gray eyes missing nothing as I laid out the story, my voice flat and steady. I slid the will, my mother's letter, and the quitclaim deed across the vast expanse of his mahogany desk. He read the will first, his expression neutral. Then he read my mother's letter, and a flicker of something, not pity, but professional interest, crossed his face. Finally, he picked up the quitclaim deed. He held it up to the light from the window, examining the notary seal, the signatures, the date it was filed with the county clerk's office. The silence stretched, thin and taut. I felt like a patient waiting for a terminal diagnosis, even though I already knew the outcome. "Well, Miss Carter," he said at last, placing the document back on the desk with a decisive tap, "your mother was a very clever woman." The validation was so potent it almost brought me to my knees. "So, it's real? It's legal?" "It is ironclad," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "A quitclaim deed, once filed, represents an immediate transfer of interest. As of 2 years ago, your mother ceased to be the legal owner of 456 Cherry Lane. You were." He leaned forward slightly. "The will attempts to bequeath a property that was not part of her estate at the time of her death. It's like trying to will your neighbor's car to your son. You can write it down, but it has no legal effect." The legal trapdoor. Mom had built it, and I had just found the key. "What happens now?" I asked, the words feeling foreign. For 7 years, my question had always been, what does she need? "Now," Mr. Davies said, a predatory stillness entering his posture, "we inform the current occupants that they are on your property. We will serve them with a formal notice to vacate." "Eviction," I said, the word tasting strange. It was a word for landlords and tenants, for financial transactions, not for family. "Precisely. They will have 30 days to remove themselves and their belongings. If they refuse, we begin legal proceedings to have them forcibly removed." He looked at me, his gaze steady. "This will not be pleasant, Miss Carter. They will likely fight it. It will get ugly," I replied, my voice harder than I expected. "It's been ugly for years. I just didn't have a name for it." I spent the next 48 hours in a state of suspended animation. I walked through the rooms of my house, touching things as if for the first time. The worn floral pattern on my mother's favorite armchair, where I'd read to her for hundreds of hours. The chip in the kitchen counter where I dropped a heavy pot, startled by the shriek of a monitor. The faint grooves in the hallway floor from the wheels of her hospital bed. They were no longer just emblems of my servitude, they were the scars of a battle I hadn't known I was winning. The house was not a museum of my sacrifice, it was the prize. I ignored Daniel's texts. "Hey, where are you?" "Jess wants to ask about the paint colors in the guest room." Then, "Architect is coming Saturday at 10. Try to be there." The casual tyranny at his assumptions was breathtaking. He wasn't asking, he was scheduling the demolition of my life. Saturday arrived, a bright, mercilessly cheerful autumn morning. I was in the kitchen, drinking a cup of black coffee, when the doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock. I didn't move. I heard Daniel's key in the lock, the key I had stupidly told him to keep after the funeral, in case of emergencies. The door opened. "Liv, you in here?" Daniel's voice boomed with false cheer. He walked into the kitchen, followed by Jessica, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Behind them was a man in a crisp blazer holding an iPad, his face a mask of professional neutrality. The architect. "There you are," Jessica chirped, her smile not reaching her eyes. "You didn't answer your phone. We were getting worried. This is Mark. He's just going to take some initial measurements. We're thinking of knocking this wall down to create a great room. It'll be fantastic for entertaining." She gestured vaguely at the wall separating the kitchen from the living room, the wall that held the faint pencil marks where my father had measured my height as a child, the wall I'd leaned against, sobbing, the night the doctor told us it was hospice time. I took a slow sip of my coffee and placed the mug down on the counter with a soft click. He won't be needing to do that. Daniel laughed, a short, patronizing bark. "Don't be difficult, Olivia. It's just a preliminary look. We're not bringing in the sledgehammers today." "No," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the sudden stillness. "You're not. Not today, not ever." Jessica's smile tightened. "Liv, we know this is emotional for you, but it's a practical decision. This house needs updating, and it's our responsibility now." It was the our responsibility that did it. The seamless, unthinking absorption of my entire world into their portfolio of assets. As Jessica opened her mouth to say something else, the doorbell rang again, sharp and insistent. Daniel frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" "I am," I said. I walked past them, my feet sure on the floorboards. I opened the door to a man in a courier's uniform holding a clipboard and a large manila envelope. "Are you Daniel Carter?" the man asked, his eyes flicking to my brother. Daniel stepped forward, a confused look on his face. "Yeah, that's me." "And Jessica Carter?" Jessica, looking unnerved, nodded. The man handed the envelope to Daniel and a pen to Jessica. "I need you both to sign here, acknowledging receipt." Confused, they scribbled their signatures. The man tipped his hat at me and departed. The whole exchange took less than 30 seconds. "What in the hell is this?" Daniel said, tearing at the envelope seal. He pulled out a sheaf of papers. His eyes scanned the first page, his brow furrowed in concentration. I watched the color drain from his face, replaced by a dull, brick-red flush of confusion that was rapidly turning to anger. "What is it?" Jessica demanded, snatching the papers from his hand. Her bright, bird-like demeanor had vanished, congealing into something sharp and reptilian. Her eyes, accustomed to scanning property tax assessments and renovation quotes, moved with lightning speed over the legal jargon. I saw the exact moment she understood. Her posture went rigid. "This is a joke," Daniel sputtered, looking at me. "A notice to vacate? What is this, Olivia? Some kind of sick prank?" "You can't do this," Jessica hissed, her voice low and venomous. Her mask of cloying sweetness had been incinerated, revealing the cold, hard ambition beneath. "The will is clear, our lawyer said." "The will," I interrupted, and the words tasted like clean, cold water after years of choking on dust, "bequeathed a property that no longer belonged to the estate. Mom gave me the house 2 years ago. It's all there. The filed deed, the notary stamp, the date. You can ask your lawyer to confirm it." I leaned against the door frame, feeling the solid wood at my back. They had been so eager to walk into this house, to claim it, to gut it. They never realized they were actually walking into their own eviction. "This is my house," I said, the words a quiet declaration of war. "You have 30 days. I suggest you get started." Daniel stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The golden child, for whom everything had always been so easy, was finally face to face with a door he couldn't open. The architect, Mark, was slowly backing toward the exit, his iPad held to his chest like a shield. "You'll hear from our lawyer," Jessica snarled, her face a pale, furious mask. "I'm sure I will," I said. "Have him call my lawyer. His number is in the documents." I held the door open for them. They stumbled out, not as conquering heirs, but as stunned, furious trespassers. I closed the door on their sputtering rage, on Jessica's icy stare, on the future they had so confidently planned. The latch clicked shut. The silence rushed back in, but it was a new kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of power. It was the silence of sovereignty. The house was no longer a museum of my sacrifice. It was my fortress, and I was finally home. The crisp crinkle of the legal paper was the only sound in the universe. For a moment, the world held its breath. The process server gave a curt, professional nod, turned on his heel, and walked back down the path, his job complete. He was the ferryman, and he had just delivered my brother and his wife to the shores of a new reality. Jessica was the first to move. She let out a small, tinkling laugh, a sound as false and fragile as a glass bird. "Olivia, honey, what is this? Some kind of prank? It's a little dark, even for you." She held the document between her thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of garbage she was reluctant to touch. Daniel didn't laugh. His face, which had been alight with the smug satisfaction of a conqueror, slowly congealed into a mask of disbelief, then darkened into a thunderous rage. The paper in his hand wasn't garbage. It was a grenade, and he seemed to finally feel its weight. "What the hell is this?" he growled, the words a low rumble in his chest. He wasn't asking me. He was accusing me. He took a step forward, his portly frame suddenly seeming larger, more menacing. The architect, a man named Henderson, took a reflexive step back, his eyes darting between us. He was an artist of lines and spaces, and he had just walked into a war zone. "It's a notice to quit," I said. My voice was steady, a stark contrast to the frantic drumming of my own heart. I had rehearsed this. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Albright, had told me to be a broken record. State the fact, do not engage, do not explain. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Daniel's face went from red to a startling shade of purple. He crumpled the notice into a tight ball, his knuckles white. "Vacate? Vacate? This is my house. Mom left it to me." "The will is irrelevant to the ownership of the property," I stated, the words tasting like clean, cold steel in my mouth. "Mom signed a quitclaim deed 2 years ago. This house has been legally mine since then. The provision in her will was null and void the moment she wrote it." Jessica's painted smile finally cracked. "A quitclaim deed? Olivia, you're not making any sense. You must be confused. You've been through so much." It was her go-to weapon, my supposed emotional fragility. She wielded it with the precision of a surgeon, attempting to dissect my credibility. "I'm not confused, Jessica," I said, my gaze locking onto hers. "I'm informed." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, gathering his large roll of blueprints. "You know," he said, his voice strained with manufactured cheerfulness, "I think I have another appointment I'd forgotten about. We can reschedule." He gave a tight, apologetic smile and practically fled to his car, leaving a vacuum of hostile silence in his wake. The audience was gone. The family drama could now begin in earnest. "You forged it," Daniel spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You took advantage of a sick woman. You isolated her, and you coerced her, and you forged a legal document. My God, Olivia, I knew you were bitter, but this..." For 7 years, I had absorbed their casual cruelty, their performative concern, their suffocating kindness. I had been the family's bedrock, the silent, sturdy pillar holding everything up. Now, in their eyes, I was the earthquake. The rage that had been a hot, metallic taste in my mouth for weeks finally found its voice. "You want to talk about taking advantage?" I shot back, my own voice rising to meet his. "You, who visited twice a year for a photo op and a home-cooked meal. You, Jessica, who sat in this very living room, scrolling through Zillow and calculating property taxes while my mother was coughing up her lungs in the next room. You want to talk about coercion?" I took a step toward them, onto the porch that I had scrubbed, whose wood I had stained. This house wasn't an asset to me. It was a hospital. It was a hospice. Every inch of it is etched into my memory with the acid of exhaustion. The spot on the carpet where I cleaned up her spilled soup, the scuff mark on the wall from the wheelchair, the window she would stare out of for hours. My voice broke, but not with weakness. It broke with the sheer, crushing weight of the truth. You weren't here. You didn't see it. You have no right to stand on this porch and tell me what I am owed. Jessica recoiled as if I had slapped her. "That's not fair," she whispered, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. "We have children, Olivia, a family. We were trying to build a future, a legacy for them. What do you have?" The final twist of the knife. "What do you have?" She meant, who are you? A single woman, an appendix to the family unit, an unmarried, childless ghost haunting the halls of their progress. "I have this house," I said, the words as solid and real as the oak door behind me, "and you have 30 days. Daniel let out a string of curses, his face contorted. He looked from me to the crumpled paper in his fist, his mind clearly racing, searching for a legal trapdoor of his own. "This isn't over," he snarled, his voice low and venomous. "This is so far from over. You'll be hearing from our lawyer. We'll see how your deed holds up in court." He grabbed Jessica's arm, pulling her toward their pristine SUV parked at the curb. She didn't resist, but she turned back to look at me one last time. The mask was gone completely. Her face was pale, her lips a thin, bloodless line. Her eyes, usually so bright and calculating, were filled with a pure, unadulterated hatred that was more honest than anything I had ever seen from her. It was the look of a thief who had been caught red-handed, not with shame, but with fury at being outsmarted. They got in the car, the doors slamming shut with a percussive finality. The engine roared to life, and they sped away from 456 Cherry Lane, leaving a trail of disturbed dust and shattered expectations. I stood there on the porch for a long time, the cool evening air beginning to settle. The adrenaline that had been a fire in my veins began to ebb, leaving behind a profound, trembling exhaustion. I retreated inside, closing and locking the heavy front door. The click of the deadbolt was a sound of immense finality. It was a full stop at the end of a long, painful sentence. The silence that filled the house was different now. It wasn't the profound, aching silence of loss that had followed my mother's passing. It was a charged, humming silence. The silence of a fortress whose walls had held. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the furniture. The worn velvet of my mother's favorite armchair, the chipped rim of the teacup she always used, the faint smell of old paper and Murphy oil soap. For weeks, these objects had felt like exhibits in the museum of my sacrifice. Now, they felt like my belongings. The house seemed to exhale around me, shedding the tension of its uncertain future. It was no longer an asset. It was no longer a legacy. It was home, my home. I sank onto the sofa, the fight replaying in my mind. Daniel's rage, Jessica's venom, his threat echoed in the quiet room. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer." I knew he wasn't bluffing. They wouldn't give up this easily. They had resources, and more importantly, they had the righteous indignation of the entitled. This victory was just the first battle in what was sure to be a protracted war. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Could I afford a legal battle? Miss Albright was confident, but confidence came with a bill. Just as the wave of doubt began to crest, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a text message. My blood went cold. It was from Aunt Ruth, of course, the family's moral enforcer. Daniel and Jessica's first call would have been to her, to rally the troops and paint me as a villain. I braced myself and opened the message. It was short, stripped of all pleasantries, each word a perfectly formed shard of ice. "Your brother just called me. I have never been so ashamed in my life. You have broken your mother's heart and destroyed this family. We are coming over tomorrow at 10. We need to fix what you have done." The silence that followed the click of the front door was a vacuum, pulling all the sound and air out of the foyer. Daniel stood frozen, the crisp legal document clutched in his hand, as if it were a venomous snake that had just bitten him. Jessica's face, usually a mask of bright, performative concern, had gone slack with shock, her mouth a small, perfect O of disbelief. The process server, a man whose entire profession was built on dropping bombs and walking away, was already a ghost on the sidewalk. What? What is this? Daniel's voice was a ragged whisper. He looked from the paper to me, his eyes wide with a confusion so profound that almost looked like innocence. Almost. "It's a notice to vacate," I said. My voice was flat, a single, clear note in the suffocating quiet. I felt strangely distant, as if I were watching this scene unfold from the top of the stairs, a ghost haunting the halls of my own life. Jessica was the first to recover, her tactical mind rebooting faster than his. She took a step forward, her hand outstretched, not to me, but toward my brother, a gesture of placation. "Okay, honey, let's not overreact," she cooed, her voice regaining its syrupy texture. She turned her eyes on me, brimming with a manufactured pity that was more insulting than any scream. "Olivia, sweetheart, what have you done? This isn't you. You're upset. We know that. You're grieving." "I'm not grieving, Jessica. I'm evicting," I stated, the words feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue. That broke Daniel's spell. A dark, ugly red began to creep up his neck, mottling the skin above his collar. "Evicting? You're kicking us out? Your own family?" He shook the paper at me, its rattle like dry bones. "This is a joke. This is some sick, twisted joke." "The quitclaim deed my mother filed 2 years ago was not a joke," I said, crossing my arms. It was a defensive posture, but it felt like bracing a shield. "This house, 456 Cherry Lane, has been legally mine since before Mom even wrote that will. The will was a diversion, a piece of theater for you." Jessica's eyes narrowed, the mask of sympathy dissolved, revealing the sharp, calculating woman beneath. I could see the gears turning, the frantic recalculation of assets and leverage. "A quitclaim deed? Margaret would never. She was ill. You took advantage of her." The accusation landed with the force of a slap. Years of sponge baths, medication schedules, and sleepless nights flashed through my mind, etched into my memory with the acid of exhaustion. Took advantage. The words came out on a gust of air that was almost a laugh. I kept her alive, Jessica. I held her hand while she was dying. Where were you? Oh, that's right. You were picking out backsplash tiles for my kitchen. Daniel crumpled the notice in his fist. You're insane. You're hysterical. Dad's money paid for this house. It's the Carter legacy, not your personal plaything. My sacrifice paid for this house, I shot back, my voice finally cracking with the hot rage I had kept banked for so long. My youth paid for it. My career paid for it. My sanity paid for it. The deed is filed with the county. My lawyer has a copy. You have 30 days. He took a menacing step forward, his portly frame suddenly seeming larger, more threatening. You'll regret this, Olivia. I swear to God you will regret this. Jessica put a restraining hand on his arm, her expression now one of cold fury. Daniel, stop. She's not worth it. She gave me a look that could strip paint. Our lawyer will be in touch. She steered him out the door, her voice a low, venomous murmur. The heavy oak door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. The final, definitive severing. I stood there, my body trembling with the adrenaline of a battle I never wanted to fight, but had just decisively won. The house seemed to exhale with me, the air thinning, the oppressive weight of their presence gone. For the first time in a week, the silence wasn't mocking. It was mine. The next 2 days were a strange limbo. I walked through the rooms of my house, touching the worn velvet of my mother's favorite armchair, tracing the faint scratches on the dining room table from decades of family dinners. I was an archaeologist excavating my own life, trying to piece together the woman who had existed before the long years of caregiving. Who was she? What did she want? My phone remained silent. No calls from Daniel, no texts from Jessica. It was a hostile quiet, the calm before the inevitable storm. The family I knew would be regrouping, planning their counterattack. Aunt Ruth would be their field marshal. The call came on Wednesday afternoon. Her name flashed on the screen, and I felt a jolt of dread, cold and immediate. I let it ring 4 times before answering, taking a deep breath and steeling myself. Olivia, she said, no preamble, no greeting. Her voice was the one she used for scolding children who had tracked mud on her pristine carpets. I am coming over. We need to talk about this mess you've made. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. The old Olivia would have stammered in agreement. The new Olivia found a different voice. If you want to talk, you're welcome to come here, Aunt Ruth, I said, my tone even. I'm not going anywhere. There was a surprised pause on the other end. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. I made a pot of coffee, the familiar ritual grounding me. I didn't set out the good china or the little plate of biscotti I would have for any other guest. This wasn't a social call. This was a tribunal. When the doorbell rang precisely 19 minutes later, I felt my heart hammer against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. But when I opened the door, my hand was steady. Aunt Ruth stood on my porch, a pillar of righteous indignation. Her iron gray hair was sprayed into a perfect, immovable helmet. She wore a beige pantsuit, practical and severe, and her orthopedic shoes were planted firmly, as if preparing for a long siege. Her purse was clutched in front of her like a shield. "Hello, Aunt," I said, stepping back to let her in. She marched past me into the living room, her eyes sweeping over the space, cataloging every detail. She didn't sit. She turned to face me, her expression a mixture of disappointment and command. "You have 5 days to retract this nonsense," she began, her voice tight with fury. "You will call Daniel, you will apologize, and you will tell your lawyer to tear up whatever ridiculous paper he has." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "No." Her jaw tightened. "Don't you say no to me, young lady. I am trying to save this family from the damage you are causing. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I have secured my home," I said quietly, "the one my mother gave me." "Your mother was not in her right mind," she snapped. "She was sick, confused, and you were whispering in her ear, poisoning her against her own son." The accusation was so familiar, so perfectly aligned with Jessica's, that I knew it was the official party line. It was the story they had all agreed upon. "Aunt Ruth, you know what I did for her. You saw it." "You did your duty," she said, the words as sharp as glass. "It's what a daughter does, but a house is for a family. It is for building a future, for raising children. Daniel has a family. He has heirs. What do you have? You're a single woman in your 40s with no prospects. What do you need all this space for? It's a matter of practicality." There it was, the nail in my coffin, hammered in with the cold logic of patriarchal tradition. My life, my sacrifice, my very existence was impractical. I was a loose thread in the family tapestry, and they were trying to snip me off. "So my 7 years of service are worth less than a marriage certificate and 2 children?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Is that the family currency? I was the bedrock, but he gets the deed because he's the complete family unit?" "It is the natural order of things," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. "A legacy is passed through the family line. Daniel carries the Carter name. His son carries the Carter name. This house is their legacy." I finally understood. It wasn't about love or gratitude or even fairness. It was about a name on a mailbox. It was about preserving a line that I, as a childless woman, could not continue. I was a dead end. I pushed myself off the doorframe and walked slowly toward the center of the room, stopping a few feet from her. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between us. "You know, for 7 years," I began, my voice soft but clear, "I was alone in this house. At 3 a.m., when Mom's fever spiked, I was alone. When the hospice nurse taught me how to change an IV drip, I was alone. When she cried because she couldn't remember Dad's face, I was alone with her. Daniel would call for 10 minutes on a Sunday, and you would all praise him as a wonderful, devoted son. I was just the staff." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "I was already alone, Aunt Ruth. You all made sure of that. The only difference is, now I'm not going to be alone and homeless." Her face, for the first time, showed a flicker of something other than anger. It looked like defeat. She had come here expecting the timid, dutiful Olivia she could lecture into submission. She hadn't been prepared for this stranger. "You are tearing this family apart," she whispered, her final desperate volley. "You will have this house, and you will have nothing else." "The family was already broken," I replied, the truth of it settling into my bones. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned without another word and walked out of my house, closing the door quietly behind her. The click was not a gunshot this time. It was the sound of a lock finally turning. I stood in the sudden quiet, the victory tasting like ash in my mouth. I had the house, I had won, and I had never felt more completely and utterly alone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another salvo from the family. It was a text from my lawyer, Mr. Davis. Olivia, just got off the phone with their attorney. They're filing suit, claiming elder abuse and undue influence to invalidate the deed. Get ready, this is just the beginning. The eviction notice had been the first volley, a cannon shot across the bow of their entitlement. The lawsuit was their answer, a declaration of total war. It didn't arrive with the dramatic fury of a shouting match. It came on a Tuesday, delivered by a man in a rumpled polo shirt who looked profoundly bored. He handed me a thick manila envelope, mumbled something about being a process server, and was gone before the screen door could swing shut behind him. For a moment, I just stood there in the entryway, the envelope a leaden weight in my hand. The silence of the house, once a profound comfort, had become hostile in the days since I'd served Daniel and Jessica. It seemed to mock me, a vast, empty space that echoed with their accusations before I'd even read them. The air, thick with the scent of lemon polish and old books, felt charged, expectant. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table, the same table where I had spoon-fed my mother her meals, where I'd sorted her medications into little plastic boxes, a rainbow of life-sustaining pills. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The paper inside was crisp, heavy, reeking of the faint, sterile smell of a copy machine. The words, arranged in dense, numbered paragraphs, were a legal trapdoor designed to swallow me whole. Carter versus Carter. It was a fiction, a grotesque parody of our family. And then I saw them, the twin phrases that felt like a physical blow: undue influence and elder abuse. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. Elder abuse. The accusation was a venomous snake coiling around the 7 years I had given up. It sought to poison every memory, to twist every act of love into a crime. I saw myself holding a cold compress to Mom's forehead during a fever, my own exhaustion a dull ache behind my eyes. I saw myself reading to her from worn paperbacks when her vision blurred, my voice growing hoarse in the quiet of the sick room. I saw myself patiently cleaning up accidents she was too proud to acknowledge, murmuring, "It's okay, Mom, we all have clumsy days." Each memory, once a testament to my devotion, was now reframed as a piece of evidence against me. My sacrifice was being rewritten as a long, calculated con. The rage that had buoyed me when I'd faced Daniel and his architect now collapsed into a cold, metallic dread that coated my tongue. This wasn't just about a house anymore. They were trying to excavate my life, steal my past, and label me a monster. Jessica's fingerprints were all over this. The language was too precise, too psychologically cruel. She knew exactly which knives to use. The shrill ring of the telephone sliced through the suffocating quiet. I knew who it was before I saw the caller ID. Aunt Ruth's name glowed on the screen, a harbinger of righteous fury. I let it ring 4 times, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Finally, I pressed the phone to my ear, my throat too tight to speak. "Olivia, what in God's name have you done?" Her voice was stripped of its usual syrupy platitudes, leaving only the hard, unyielding steel of her judgment. "Hello, Aunt Ruth," I said, my own voice a flat, distant echo. "Don't you hello Aunt Ruth me. Daniel called me, hysterical. You served him papers on his own mother's property, and now he's had to file a lawsuit. A lawsuit? You're tearing this family to shreds over a building." The injustice of her words was a spark in the cold fog of my fear. "He's the one suing me," I said, the words sharp as glass. "He's accusing me of abusing my own mother." There was a brief pause, a tactical retreat. "Well," she huffed, her tone shifting into a familiar lecturing cadence, "this is what happens when things get so emotional. You forced his hand, Olivia. You know perfectly well that your mother would have wanted the house to stay with the family line. Daniel has children, a wife. He has a legacy to build. It's the practical, sensible decision. My 7 years of care weren't practical? I shot back, the question raw and bleeding. Was it sensible for me to quit my job, to give up my life while he visited twice a year on his way to a vacation? That was your choice, she said, her voice chillingly devoid of sympathy. You're a single woman. It was your duty. Daniel had a family to provide for. You're being selfish, and you're letting your bitterness destroy what little is left of the Carters. Think about what you're doing to his children. The mention of my niece and nephew was the final twist of the knife. They were using their own children as a shield. I was no longer just the selfish spinster. I was a threat to the next generation. He is accusing me of a crime, Aunt Ruth, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. He's trying to say my love was a lie. There is no family left to tear apart. He and Jessica already took a sledgehammer to it. I hung up before she could respond, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The conversation had been a clarifying poison. There was no reasoning with them. They lived in a different reality, one where their desires were facts and my sacrifice was an inconvenience. They had drawn the battle lines, and I was standing on the other side, alone. But I wasn't a ghost haunting these halls anymore. I was the legal owner of this battlefield. The next morning, I did not grieve. I organized. I gathered the quitclaim deed, my mother's letter, the eviction notice, and the monstrous lawsuit into a neat file. The memory of Mr. Davies' office, with its dark wood and leather-bound condescension, was a warning. I didn't need a patriarch to pat my hand and tell me about the law. I needed a warrior. I spent hours online, cross-referencing names from the State Bar Association with reviews, looking for specialists in probate and estate litigation. I wasn't looking for a family lawyer. I was looking for a shark. I found her on the 3rd page of search results, Sarah Chen. Her website was minimalist and modern, her bio direct. She had a reputation for being relentless in deposition and surgically precise in court. Her office was nothing like Mr. Davies' masculine tomb. It was on the 14th floor of a downtown skyscraper with glass walls that offered a panoramic view of the city. The space was bright, clean, and functional, filled with blonde wood and brushed steel. It wasn't a place for mourning. It was a command center. Sarah Chen was younger than I expected, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, focused energy that immediately put me on edge in the best possible way. She didn't offer condolences. She gestured to a chair and said, "Walk me through it, from the beginning." I did. The story that had been churning inside me for years came pouring out, the beeping chorus of machines, the performative concern from Daniel and Jessica, the crushing weight of the will reading, the miraculous discovery of the deed, and finally, the lawsuit. I slid the folder across her polished desk. My voice cracked only once when I got to the words elder abuse. She listened without interruption, her gaze unwavering. She read every document, her expression unreadable. For 10 long minutes, the only sound was the rustle of paper. Finally, she steepled her fingers and looked at me. "The quitclaim deed is your fortress, Miss Carter," she began, her voice crisp and devoid of false sympathy. "It was filed, notarized, and recorded 2 years ago. It's a legally binding transfer of title. The will has no power over an asset your mother no longer owned at the time of her death." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. "So I'll win?" "It's not that simple." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "A claim of undue influence isn't about paperwork, it's about narrative. Their strategy will be to paint a picture. You, the lonely, resentful daughter. Your mother, a frail, sick woman, isolated and easily manipulated. They will argue that you coerced her into signing that deed, taking advantage of her diminished capacity to steal the family's birthright from your brother. She leaned forward. Our job is to paint a different picture. Your brother and his wife, opportunistic, distant, and greedy, waiting for an inheritance they felt entitled to. Your mother, clear-headed, strong-willed, and fully aware of her children's true characters. She didn't sign that deed out of weakness. She signed it as a deliberate, final act of justice. She tapped my mother's letter with a perfectly manicured nail. This is our emotional anchor. It's powerful evidence of her state of mind. But this will be ugly. They will depose you. They will ask invasive questions about your life, your finances, your relationship with your mother. They will try to break you on the stand, to make you look volatile and unstable. They want to turn your grief against you. I looked out the window at the sprawling city below, a world that had gone on without me for 7 years. I had been a ghost, a caretaker, a daughter. Then, for one brief, shining moment, I had been a victor. Now, I had to become something else. "What do you need from me?" I asked, my voice steady. A small, thin smile touched Sarah Chen's lips. Everything. Journals, emails, texts, photos, a list of neighbors, doctors, and hospice nurses who saw you here every day. We will build a timeline so detailed, so irrefutable, that it suffocates their narrative before it can even draw breath. They want to put your character on trial, Miss Carter, so we will put theirs on trial first. Leaving her office, I felt the city air, cool and sharp, fill my lungs. The fear hadn't vanished. It was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But it was no longer a paralyzing fog. It was a whetstone. When I arrived back at 456 Cherry Lane, the house looked different. It was no longer a museum of my sacrifice or a monument to my grief. It was the ground zero of my war. The worn armchair where Mom used to sit, the faded photograph of us on the mantelpiece, the scuff marks on the floor from her walker, they were no longer just memories. They were my witnesses. The lawsuit was meant to be the final blow, the legal maneuver that would terrify me into submission. But they had miscalculated. They didn't understand that after 7 years of watching death inch closer, I was no longer afraid of a fight. They had mistaken my exhaustion for weakness. They had mistaken my love for a flaw. They wanted a war. Now, they had one. The office of Eleanor Albright was nothing like the one where my life had been dismantled. There was no dark wood suffocating the light, no leather-bound books acting as silent, judgmental witnesses. Her domain, on the 12th floor of a downtown skyscraper, was all glass and steel, a landscape of unapologetic modernity. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive paper. It was the scent of competence, a clean, sharp aroma that promised precision, not dusty platitudes. Miss Albright herself was a reflection of her surroundings. She was a woman who looked to be in her late 50s, with a severe silver bob that framed a face that had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. She didn't offer me tea or a stiff, awkward embrace of sympathy. She offered me a chair and the unvarnished truth. "They filed," she said, her voice as crisp as the manila folder she slid across the glass desk toward me. "Petition to invalidate the quitclaim deed. The grounds are elder abuse and undue influence." The words elder abuse not like a slap, but like a slow, crushing weight, the kind that presses the air from your lungs and leaves you gasping. It was a legal term, clinical and cold, but it felt like the most intimate violation yet. For 7 years, my world had shrunk to the 4 walls of my mother's sick room. My hands were the ones that had smoothed her hair, measured her medicine, held a cup of water to her lips in the dead of night. Those same hands were now being accused of coercion. It was the final desecration of my sacrifice, twisting care into a crime. "They're claiming you systematically isolated your mother," Miss Albright continued, her eyes scanning my face, gauging my reaction with the dispassionate focus of a surgeon. "That you manipulated her in a weakened state to seize her primary asset." I didn't seize anything, I said, my voice a low tremor. The rage I thought I had contained was back, a hot, metallic taste on my tongue. She gave it to me, she said. She knew what they were. She knew they saw her as a line item in their 5-year plan. I believe you, she said simply. The words were a balm, but not a cure. But a judge doesn't know you. A judge knows what can be proven. Right now, they are painting a picture of a devoted son and his loving family, pushed aside by a greedy, manipulative spinster who took advantage of a dying woman. The word spinster hung in the air, a deliberate choice on her part. It was the unspoken accusation behind Aunt Ruth's lectures, the pity in Jessica's saccharine smiles. I was the incomplete unit, the loose thread in the family tapestry. So we paint a better picture, Miss Albright stated, leaning forward. We paint the true one. I've read your initial summary. Now I need the details, Miss Carter, all of them. I need you to become an archaeologist excavating your own life. Every pharmacy receipt, every canceled appointment of theirs, every text message, every email. We're not just defending against their claim, we are building a case for their motive. And their motive, she tapped the folder, is pure, unadulterated greed. The dam inside me didn't break with a torrent of tears. It cracked open, and the memories poured out, no longer just ghosts of my past, but pieces of evidence. I started talking. I told her about the beeping chorus of the machines that became the soundtrack to my life. I described the nights I spent on a cot by Mom's bed because she was afraid of the dark, her breath a fragile whisper in the oppressive silence. I spoke of Daniel's visits, how they were always framed by a deadline, a dinner reservation, a soccer game, a flight to catch. He'd breeze in, kiss Mom's forehead, tell me I was a saint, and then spend 20 minutes on his phone in the hallway, his voice a low, urgent hum of business. They were the guests. I was the staff. And Jessica? Miss Albright prompted, her pen scratching against a legal pad. Jessica, I said, a bitter smile touching my lips. Jessica was the master of weaponized kindness. I pulled out my phone, my fingers scrolling back through years of messages. It was all there, a digital chronicle of their performative concern. Here, I said, turning the screen toward her. This was 2 days after Mom's first major stroke. She was in the ICU. I texted them an update, and Jessica's reply was, "Oh, that's so worrying. Praying for her. By the way, while you're there, can you check if the mail has the new property tax assessment? I'm just trying to get a handle on carrying costs for the future." Miss Albright's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, satisfaction perhaps, danced in her eyes. "Carrying costs," she repeated softly. "Excellent." I kept going, the words spilling out faster. I told her about the time I had to cancel my own long overdue dental appointment because Mom had a fall, and when I mentioned it to Daniel, he'd said, "Well, that's what the emergency fund is for, Liv. Just pull from Mom's account to cover your stuff." He didn't see it as my time, my health, my life. He saw it as an expense to be managed. I showed her the calendar entries, Dr. Evans, 2 p.m., physical therapy, 10 a.m., oncology follow-up, Friday. My name was next to every single one. Daniel's name appeared twice in 3 years, both times followed by a "canceled" in my own neat script. They sent fruit baskets for Christmas, I said, the memory so absurd it was almost funny. They'd call on Christmas Day and ask if the basket had arrived, as if that was the same as being there. I'd be in the kitchen trying to puree a holiday meal Mom could swallow, and Jessica would be on speakerphone talking about the kids' new ski equipment. The more I spoke, the lighter I felt. The suffocating kindness, the patronizing praise, the years of being taken for granted. In Miss Albright's office, these weren't just personal grievances. They were ammunition. The narrative they had built around me, that of the lonely, pitiable daughter, was beginning to crumble under the weight of their own casual cruelty. And Aunt Ruth? The enforcer, I said. She'll testify that Mom always wanted Daniel to have the house, that it's a man's place to carry the family legacy. She believes it. To her, my 7 years of service were simply my duty as the unmarried daughter, My expected function. Good, Miss Albright said, a word that sounded strange in this context. Let her. An outdated patriarchal worldview will play very poorly in front of a female judge. We'll depose her. We'll depose all of them. We'll ask Daniel to list under oath every doctor's appointment he attended. We'll ask Jessica to explain her concern for property taxes while her mother-in-law was on a ventilator. We will let them build our case for us. She leaned back, her work for the moment done. They've made a critical mistake, Miss Carter. In their haste to paint you as a monster, they have opened the door for us to prove what they really are. They think this is about a house. We are going to make it about their character. I left her office an hour later, the city lights beginning to glitter in the twilight. The air was cool against my face. The weight in my chest hadn't vanished, but its shape had changed. It was no longer the formless anchor of despair. It was a solid, cold ball of resolve. When I got back to 456 Cherry Lane, the silence was different. It was no longer the hostile, mocking silence of an empty house that wasn't mine. It was the quiet of a fortress, my fortress. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the worn velvet of my mother's favorite armchair. I looked at the faint, ghostly indent her head had left on the pillow of her bed, a space I had kept pristine. These were not just memories anymore. They were exhibits. This house wasn't just the museum of my sacrifice. It was the scene of the crime. Theirs, not mine. I went to my mother's desk, the place where I'd found the box. I took out the quitclaim deed, its crisp folds a testament to her final secret act of rebellion. I ran my thumb over her signature, a familiar scrawl that now felt like a battle standard. Daniel and Jessica had started a war to take my home. They didn't realize I was the one who held the high ground. They had accused me of undue influence, of being a criminal. They had no idea what I was truly capable of. I wasn't just a caretaker anymore. I was the keeper of every single one of their sins, and I was finally ready to make them pay. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday, delivered not by a mail carrier, but by a stoic man in an impersonal khaki shirt who refused to make eye contact. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have, weighted with more than just paper. It was dense with malice. I accepted it on the porch of 456 Cherry Lane, the very porch where I had helped my mother into her wheelchair on sunny days, the wood beneath my feet a silent witness to years of quiet devotion. Now it felt like the defendant's stand. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the kitchen table, the same table where I'd sorted Mom's pills into their weekly containers, where I'd spoon-fed her soup when her hands trembled too much. The envelope sat there like an unexploded bomb, a stark, rectangular blot on the familiar floral tablecloth. For a moment, the silence of the house was suffocating. It was no longer the profound quiet of loss, but the hostile quiet of a place that might be stolen from me. My hands were shaking when I finally broke the seal. The rasp of the paper was unnervingly loud. The legal jargon was a thicket of thorns, but the intent was as clear as glass. Daniel Carter and Jessica Carter v. Olivia Carter. And then the accusations. Undue influence. The words were a legal branding iron searing into me. They claimed I had systematically preyed on my mother's weakened state, manipulating her into signing the quitclaim deed. My 7 years of service, the sponge baths, the midnight vigils, the endless beeping chorus of medical machines, were reframed as a long con, a calculated campaign to seize the family's primary asset. Elder abuse and isolation. This was the part that made the air leave my lungs. My trips to the pharmacy were twisted into evidence of me controlling her medication. My insistence that visitors call before coming over, a simple precaution to manage her profound fatigue, was painted as a sinister plot to isolate her from her loving family. Every act of care, every sacrifice was meticulously cataloged and smeared with the venom of their greed. They had taken the sacred text of my life for the past 7 years and rewritten it as a criminal indictment. I read about myself as if I were a stranger, a monster lurking in the shadows of my mother's sick room. They described a version of Olivia Carter who was conniving, bitter, and predatory. The rage that rose in me wasn't hot and explosive. It was a cold, heavy tide, filling my chest until I thought my ribs would crack. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were trying to annihilate my past, to poison the memory of my mother, to erase the one thing I had left, the truth of my sacrifice. My first call was to Mr. Davies. His voice, a calm baritone over the phone, was an anchor in the swirling chaos. I read him excerpts from the filing, my own voice flat and brittle, a ghost haunting the words that were meant to describe me. He let out a long, low whistle when I was done. "Well," he said, the word devoid of panic, "they're not pulling any punches." "Can they do this?" I asked, the question sounding childishly small. "Can they just lie like this?" "They can allege anything they want, Olivia. It's a classic Hail Mary. The will failed, so now they're trying to invalidate the deed that overrides it. It's a nasty, brutish tactic, but not an uncommon one when property is involved." "They're saying I abused my own mother?" I whispered. The metallic taste of fury was back in my mouth. "I know, and we are going to systematically dismantle that lie," he said, his tone shifting from empathetic to strategic. "This is what happens next. It's a process called discovery. It's going to be invasive. They will request documents, bank statements, phone records, emails. They will want to depose you, which means you'll sit in a conference room while their lawyer questions you under oath for hours. They'll try to trip you up, to make you look emotional, unstable, or greedy." The image was stark, me alone in a cold room, being cross-examined by a stranger, paid to believe the worst of me, while Daniel and Jessica watched, their faces masks of performative concern. But Mr. Davies continued, his voice cutting through my grim visualization. "Discovery is a two-way street. We will depose them too. We will ask Daniel to account for every single weekend he was too busy to visit. We'll ask Jessica to explain the property tax calculations she was making while her mother-in-law was in hospice. We will request their financial records. We will subpoena Aunt Ruth and ask her to repeat her charming theories about family legacy under oath." A fragile spark ignited in the cold dread. He wasn't just defending, he was preparing to attack. "They have made a fatal error, Olivia," he said. "They have put your character and your actions at the center of this case. And from what you've told me, your record of care is your greatest weapon. They think they're putting you on trial. In reality, they have just given us a legal mandate to put their neglect on trial." After we hung up, I walked through the house, my fortress, my sanctuary, my crime scene. I ran my hand along the worn oak banister, its surface smoothed by the passage of generations. I stopped at the faint scuff mark on the wall at the bottom of the stairs, a permanent memory from the one time I nearly dropped Mom's wheelchair. I saw the small water stain on the ceiling in the living room from an overflowing bathtub 2 years ago, when I'd been so exhausted I'd forgotten I'd left the water running. This house wasn't just wood and nails, it was a repository of my life, a museum of my sacrifice. Daniel and Jessica wanted to turn it into a crime scene, but every scuff, every stain, every worn patch of carpet was evidence for my defense. They wanted to put me on trial? Fine, I would become an archaeologist of my own life, excavating every receipt from the pharmacy, every note from a visiting nurse, every calendar entry marking another doctor's appointment. I would bury them in the proof of their own absence. The phone rang that evening, its shrill cry tearing through the quiet. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't seen in weeks, Aunt Ruth. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but Mr. Davies' words echoed in my mind. The time for being quiet, for absorbing blows, was over. I answered, holding the phone to my ear without a word. "Olivia," she began, her voice dripping with the sanctimonious disappointment she had perfected over a lifetime. "I just spoke with Daniel." "I cannot believe what you are doing to this family." "What am I doing, Aunt Ruth?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "This lawsuit, forcing them to take legal action. You are tearing this family apart over a building. Blood is thicker than water, Olivia. Your mother would be ashamed. There it was, the final twist of the knife, wielded by the family's self-appointed moral executioner, the specter of my mother, deployed to shame me into submission. But the spell was broken. The guilt she was trying to conjure had no purchase, burned away by the fury of the day's accusations. "Don't you dare," I said, and the ice in my voice surprised even me. "Don't you ever dare speak to me about what my mother would have wanted. You weren't here. You sat in your comfortable house judging me from a distance while I held her hand through chemo. You sent a casserole and called it support." She sputtered, shocked into silence for a rare moment. "Now you listen to me, young lady." "No," I cut her off, standing straighter in the center of my kitchen. "You listen. You and Daniel and Jessica have decided that my life, my work, my love for my mother are all worthless. You've called me a criminal to try and steal my home. You seem to believe that because I was quiet for 7 years, I am weak. You are about to learn the difference between silence and weakness. You are being selfish and emotional," she snapped, falling back on the family's favorite dismissal. "I am being precise," I countered. "You told me to be practical. Well, this is me being practical. I have a bead, I have a lawyer, and I have 7 years of receipts. So you can tell Daniel and Jessica that I will see them at the deposition." I heard her sharp intake of breath, the sound of her righteous indignation colliding with a wall it could not breach. "The time for family discussions is over, Aunt Ruth," I said, letting each word land with the weight of a gavel. "From now on, you can communicate with me through my attorney." I hung up before she could respond, leaving her with nothing but a dial tone and the stunning realization that the family's bedrock had just become its adversary. The silence that followed was no longer hostile. It was the calm, clean silence of a battle line drawn. The lawsuit arrived not as a phone call or an email, but as a crisp manila envelope delivered by a man with a face of bored disinterest. He handed it to me on the porch of 456 Cherry Lane, the same porch where I'd helped my mother into her wheelchair 1,000 times, the wood worn smooth by the geography of our lives. He asked me to confirm my name, Olivia Carter, and when I did, a flicker of something, pity perhaps, or just professional indifference, crossed his face before he turned and walked back to his nondescript sedan. The weight of the envelope was negligible, but it felt like a brick in my hands. I stood there for a long moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn, the silence of the house pressing in, no longer profound, but accusatory. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Jessica had chirped about property taxes, and slid my finger under the seal. The words swam before my eyes, each letter a tiny black scorpion. Daniel Carter and Jessica Carter, plaintiffs, versus Olivia Carter, defendant. And below that, the allegations, typed in cold, merciless font. Undue influence, breach of fiduciary duty, elder financial abuse. The air left my lungs in a sudden violent rush. Elder abuse. They had taken my 7 years of service, the night spent sleeping in a chair by her bed, the endless rotation of medications, the spoon feeding, the bed baths, the slow and agonizing erosion of my own life, and twisted it into a legal cudgel they could use to beat me. They weren't just trying to take the house, they were trying to poison the well of my past, to rewrite history with me as the villain. It was an act of such profound, breathtaking cynicism that for a moment I couldn't feel anger. I could only feel a hollow, cavernous shock. The legal jargon was a thicket of thorns, depositions, discovery, motions to invalidate. They were challenging the quitclaim deed, claiming Mom was not of sound mind when she signed it, that I had coerced her, isolating her from her loving family to steal her primary asset. Loving family. The phrase was so obscenely false it was almost laughable. The rage returned then, but it wasn't the hot, explosive kind from before. This was different. It was cold and dense, a block of ice forming in my chest. This was a war. and they had just deployed a chemical weapon, one designed to choke the very air from my lungs and blacken my name for good. My hands were shaking as I searched online for a probate litigation attorney. The names and faces blurred together, all promising aggressive representation. I chose one with a woman's name, Sarah Albright, whose website seemed less about sharks and more about strategy. Her office was downtown, in a building of clean lines, glass, and brushed steel that felt a world away from the dark wood and suffocating masculinity of Mr. Henderson's firm. 2 days later, I sat across from her, the summons and complaint lying between us on her sleek desk. Miss Albright was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a calm, focused energy that was the exact opposite of my frayed nerve panic. She read through the documents in a silence that was methodical, not judgmental. "Well," she said finally, leaning back in her chair, "they're not pulling any punches." "They're accusing me of abusing my mother," I said, my voice flat, stripped of emotion. "After everything I did." "Of course they are," she replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "This isn't about love or legacy, Miss Carter. This is about money. The house is a significant asset, and your brother feels entitled to it. When your mother's legal trapdoor, as you called it, snapped shut, this was their only way to pry it back open. They have to prove she was either incompetent or that you forced her hand. The elder abuse claim is the sledgehammer they used to do it." She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the complaint. "They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. They'll request Mom's medical records, depose her doctors, nurses, anyone who ever visited. They'll depose you, of course. They will try to paint a picture of you as a manipulative, isolated spinster who took advantage of a sick old woman." Each word was a nail hammered into my skin. "But it's not true, none of it." "I believe you," she said, and the simple, direct way she said it almost broke me. It was the validation I hadn't realized I was starving for. "Our job is to prove it. The quitclaim deed is a very strong document. It was filed, notarized, and recorded 2 years ago. They have a steep, uphill battle to invalidate it. But it will be expensive, and it will be ugly." "Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Daniel's patronizing smirk, of Jessica's saccharine voice talking about paint swatches while my mother was dying upstairs. I thought of the eviction notice and the fury in their eyes, the fury of thieves who believed they were the ones being robbed. "Yes," I said, the word tasting like iron. "I'm prepared." "Good," Miss Albright nodded. "First step, we file our answer. We deny every single allegation. Then we start our own discovery. We'll request their financial records, their emails, their text messages. If they want to talk about motivation, let's talk about motivation." A thin, sharp smile touched her lips. "This is a game of chicken, Miss Carter. They're betting you'll be so horrified by the accusations, so afraid of the cost and the public spectacle, that you'll swerve, that you'll agree to sell the house and split the proceeds just to make it go away." Her words hung in the air, a perfect articulation of their strategy. It was psychological warfare with the house as the prize. The first volley of that warfare came that evening. The phone rang, and caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in months. Aunt Ruth. I let it ring 4 times, my heart pounding a heavy, resentful rhythm. Finally, I answered. "Olivia," she began, her voice dripping with the weary disappointment she had perfected over a lifetime. There was no greeting, just the immediate launch into her lecture. "This has gone too far." "What do you want, Aunt Ruth?" I asked, my voice as tired as I felt. "I want you to stop this madness. Your brother called me. A lawsuit? In a family? It's shameful. You should never have let it get to this point." The blame, as always, landed squarely on my shoulders. I was the one who had let it happen. He and Jessica are suing me, I said, clipping the words. They are accusing me of abusing my own mother. It's just legal talk, Olivia. You're being emotional, she snapped, parroting a line that could have come directly from Jessica's mouth. They were pushed into a corner. What did you expect when you threw them out of their own home? It was never their home, I said. Mom gave it to me. She was a sick woman who didn't know what she was doing. Aunt Ruth's voice rose, cracking with self-righteousness. Daniel has a family to think of, a wife, children.
He needs that stability, that legacy. What do you need it for? It's just you. It's a big, empty house for one person. It's not practical. You need to be the bigger person here. Call your brother. Tell him you'll agree to sell. It's the only decent thing to do. Think of your mother's memory. The final twist of the knife. Using Mom's memory to justify undoing her final secret wish. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it was absolute. It was a stone dropping into a deep well. What did you say? No, I repeated, a little louder this time. I will not sell. I will not give it to them. And if you call me again on their behalf, I will add your name to the list of people my lawyer can depose. I'm sure she'd be very interested in your definition of what is practical for a family. The silence on the other end was pure, distilled shock. I had never spoken to her like that in my life. Before she could recover, before the sputtering indignation could begin, I ended the call. I stood in the center of the living room, the phone still clutched in my hand. The house was quiet again, but the silence had changed once more. It was no longer accusatory. It was waiting. The faint scent of lemon polish and old wood filled my senses, the ghosts of the past swirling around me. But for the first time, they didn't feel like ghosts of sorrow or sacrifice. They felt like an army. Mom's letter, the deed, the years etched into the walls, they were my armor, my shield. My brother, his wife, and their enforcer aunt thought this was a fight over an asset. They thought they could scare me, shame me, and bankrupt me into submission. They had mistaken my exhaustion for weakness. They had mistaken my grief for surrender. Looking at the worn armchair where my mother used to sit, I felt the last of my fear burn away, leaving behind something hard and clear. This was no longer just a house. It was a testament. It was the last stand against a lifetime of being the convenient one, the responsible one, the one who could be safely overlooked. They had started a war to take my home. I would fight it to reclaim my life.